there, and a Happy New Year to all of you. And it's kind of apposite that we're talking about dates immediately, because that's what this video is all about, looking at some of the new date and time features that we have in .NET 6. And so we're going to look at two new data types called date only and time only that solve some of the slight problems you may have encountered with the existing date time structure. Now, the date time structure has been around in C# and .NET really since time immemorial, by which we mean 2001 when .NET first came along. And it's a pretty powerful struct. It means that we can store absolutely any date and time to a precision of a tenth of a microsecond in the period from the beginning of the 1st of January in the year 1 AD right through to the 31st of December in the year 9999. So a nice big range we've got there with quite a high degree of precision. But logically, it doesn't always make sense to have bound together the two ideas of date and time into a single data type. Because let's consider some things. Let's consider a date, like let's say my birthday, which is the 16th of March 1968. Put it in your diary. Now, actually, I happen to know that I was born at 20 past midnight on the 16th of March 1968, because my parents told me that. But for the most part, nobody really cares about that. Okay, maybe if you're some astrologer or some other person like that wants to do my horoscope, then the time of birth is important, but in general, nobody's interested. They just want to know the date of birth. And in fact, knowing too much information can lead to problems, because I was born in the UK, as I say, at 20 past midnight on the 16th of March. But if you consider someone in New York, if they had that precise date and time, actually, that would really be 20 past 7 on the 15th of March. And if they then worked through that logically, they'd say, no, your birthday is the 15th of March because in New York it was the 15th of March. That's not how birthdays work. That's not how dates work. But it is, to an extent, how date times work. And in fact, in a practical sense, that sort of thing can occur, because if you have on a web application a server running in New York and a browser running in the UK, you've got to account for that time difference. And although there are plenty of techniques to do that, unless you get it right, you can cause those sort of mistakes. Equally, as well as having things that are just dates, we also want to have things that are just times. So if I ask you, what time do you get up in the morning, then the answer might come back as something like a time of 7:30. You don't say, I get up in the morning at 7:30 on the 3rd of January, I get up in the morning at 7:30 on the 4th of January. You don't need to have the date included because it's just a time. Now, there are ways around this that we can do with a date time. If we've got a date time and we just want it to represent a date, then typically we set the time part to midnight on whatever date we're looking at. But although that can work, it's not really expressing the same idea. Midnight on a particular date, if I say I'll meet you at midnight on the 3rd of January, that is precisely a time, whereas just leaving the time by default to midnight means the date, not the precise time on that date. So, although it can be made to work, it is a bit of a hack and it causes conceptual problems when you're trying to think about how this works. Equally, way we can represent times, well, what do? We could say, just have a date time and then set the date to the 1st of January 1 AD. But again, that is genuinely a date. It would get a bit confusing. So what we sometimes do actually is use a thing called a time span, which simply represents a difference in time. And we could say, well, if we have a time span of, say, 6 hours, that could represent 6 o'clock in the morning. But even then, it's not perfect, because a time span can be more than 24 hours. What does that mean? So that's why .NET 6 has introduced these two specific types that allow us to deal with something that is just a date and something that's just a time. So let's take a look at what we've got there. They're pretty straightforward. Here we've got a console application, and so obviously we know already I can put in a date time and call that DT, and then I can very commonly initialize that just to now, or also, again, to avoid worrying about time zones, UTC now, so for the universal time coordinate. Or indeed, I can say equals new date time, and then various constructor overloads, you can see a lot of them there, that I can specify it in terms of just a date, which will set the time to midnight, or I can start putting in hours and minutes and seconds, and so on and so forth. So various ways that we can do that one. Let's just leave it a now for now. But then the two new things we've got what's known as a date only. So let's just call that D. And that one, a number of ways we can do it. Again, we've got constructors, so I can do a date only and just specify the year, month and day. And that's not quite the same. That's not saying it's midnight on this date. It's simply saying it is only a date. So that's what we can do there. Or indeed, we can do things like date only dot and then use a static method. And you'll notice there we don't have anything like a now or a today or something like that, but it's actually pretty simple because we do have from date time. So I could put in there from date time and then in there put in DT, and so that would now be a date that just strips off the time, whatever time of day it was, 10:41 at the moment, and just gives us that date. And then once we've got that, we've got lots of useful methods on there. I'm not going to go through all of these. They're quite similar to what you have on date time, but anything related to time removed, and you can look those up for yourself. The other one that we've got is we've got the time only. And again, in this one, we can create it in various ways. So I can say new time only, and then we can see we've got a number of overloads for how we can set up a particular time. We can go down to milliseconds, that sort of thing. Or once again, we can do a time only dot from date time. And so there we could strip off the date part and just get the time part that we have in there. Doing the reverse process, we could have a date time DT2. And on that, we could say on our date dot to date time. But then because we've only got a date, we've got to provide the time. So actually, I could just put T back in there, and that would completely reconstruct what DT was from the two parts of it. Or I could put in some other time. So if we wanted just to make that something like 10:30, then I could do that and reconstruct the date time from that. What we don't have, you notice, is if I were to say on the time T.2, we don't have a to date time. So although you can convert a date to a date time, there's no direct conversion for a time to a date time. But what we can do, as I mentioned, the best way of representing a time on its own before these came in was to use a time span. So I can do a to time span, and then that will just give me the time span equivalent. Let's call it TS for time span, and that's what we'd have there. I'm not going to go through all of these methods and little bits and pieces. They're all fairly self-explanatory. If we just take a look at the definition of these things, there we can see we've got our date, and it's a read-only struct, so that makes it immutable. It's got various useful comparators and formatters and things like that, and that's all the information we've got for that. And we'll see something similar if we look at the definition of time only. Again, a read-only struct, so these things are immutable. And we talked about the benefits of immutability in an earlier video that you can have a look at as well. So that's all that we've got there. But let's now start trying to talk about this in practice, because it's easy enough going through in a console application the various features that we have. But in a real application, what do you want to do with these time onlys and date onlys? Well, what I want to do is have some kind of web application where I can send these out through a web API, get them manipulated on the browser, send them back, store them in a database, all that sort of thing. And so let's just take this datetime API that I've written, set it as the startup project, and then you'll see what I've got in here. I've got as a model, I've simply got this data item, as I've called it, that has an ID and then a date time, a date only, and a time only. So the old one and then the two new ones. And then I've got a controller, quite a bit commented out here just to save me typing when we change things. But the main thing I've got here is I've got a get that gets by ID, but in fact it doesn't use the ID at this stage. All we do is we throw together a data item object, give it a date time and a date and a time, all based on the current time, and that's what we return, just using Web API. And so if I run that up, and we can see here that we get the Swagger. And so if we just go into the get, try it out, put in an ID, remember this doesn't matter, we've got to put it in there, and then click execute, and we can see we get this horrible error message being sent back. And that's because these date-only types and time-only types are not yet supported by the JSON serializer that converts our C# object into JSON, which is what's being sent from a web API, and indeed converts it back if we send any data in there. So that's an immediate problem we're hitting, that although these types have been added to the library in .NET 6, they've not been implemented in lots of places that we might expect them to be. And the first one of them is to do with this JSON serialization. Now, fortunately, there is a way around this. So what we can do is we can write our own JSON serializer for those particular types. And so I'll see here, I've got a folder called converters, and I've done, amongst other things, I've got the date-only JSON converter, and that overrides this JSON converter base class for date-only. You'll notice here I'm using the .NET built-in JSON library, not Newtonsoft, but you can do this with Newtonsoft as well. But I'm just going to show you this because the principles are just the same. So we derive from that base class, and then that means we need two methods for doing the serialization and the deserialization. So you can see here, read is the deserialization, so we get hold of the string representation, and then just like so many other data types, date only has got a parse that will then convert that back into the date only. And then the write is for the serialization. Here we get to choose the format we're going for, because this is not standardized by .NET itself. So we're going to go for year, month and day in the format we've got there. But you could put other things there as well. So that's the date only JSON converter. And then we've got a very similar time only JSON converter, again with the read and the write, and we get to choose our own format. And we're going to 3 decimal places of precision on the seconds there. That's what we've got. So those are already written, easy enough to do. You can grab the code from GitHub if you want to copy that. But then they've obviously got to be integrated into the whole system, and we do that back in program. So this is the new style program that we get with .NET 6 when we create a web application. And what we've got there on that add controllers, what I can then do is .add JSON options. So this is where I can configure anything I want to do with the JSON serialization. And that takes a lambda whose parameter is options. And then we'll got the lambda arrow there. We'll give it a body because there's a couple of things I want to do. And we're going to say options dot JSON serializer options dot converters dot add. And then we give it new. And then we'll have our date only JSON converter that we've got there. And then I need to add a second one because we've also got the time we've got to deal with. And so we'll put in our time only JSON converter. So those are the two that we've created. And that is how we can configure the JSON serialization to do whatever we like. In fact, we could do all sorts of other variants here, but that's what we've got there. And so now if we run this up, and there we've got our Swagger, we go to the get, and we can do the try it out. Again, the number doesn't matter, hit execute. And now we can see that the date time has been serialized just with the standard representation. The date is just the date part, and then the time we've got, as I say, to the 3 decimal places, but we could have done more if we wanted to. Equally, that works in reverse as well, because you'll notice we have this post that we put on the controller. So it doesn't do very much at all at the moment. We'll come on to making it store the data in the database in a second. But let's just pop a break on there, and then let's go back to our Swagger. And what I'll do is I'll copy the output that we had there, and then if we go to the post, try it out, we can just pop that in there. Let's not worry about changing anything, doesn't matter too much. But now when I hit execute, we've come into here, and if we look at the item, we can see the date and the date time and the time are the ones that we had created as the UTC now a couple of minutes ago. So we've got that working in both directions. So not too much of an effort to get it working with Web API, but something that I think would have been nice if that were just there in .NET from the start, rather than them giving us the structs and us having to then write this for ourselves. You'll encounter similar problems, I won't show you here, but with MVC, if you want to actually have your views generated, you will have to do some of your own binding in a slightly different way, but the same basic ideas we've done here. But the other thing I want to do is hook this up to a database. So let's go about doing that. And you can see I've already got some of the code related to that. So I've already got a DB context. So there's my date time context that I've got there with just this list of items. If we go to the program, that's where that's being configured. So let's uncomment that. So we've got our date time context, I've got a connection string. And then if we go back to our controller, let's uncomment some more stuff here. So there you can see we're injecting that context that we've got there. And we're also now got a get for get all that just returns the items. And then also let's make our post. So it adds that item, saves the changes, and then just returns the URL for where that new item has been created. So that's what we've got there. And then the last thing I'm going to have to do back in program again is we're going to have to actually create that database. So I could have done this through the code first migration, but it's just a bit easier to put it in the program. So here we are just getting the DB context. Remember from that earlier video we did on how the program is now structured in a .NET 6 Web API application. You've got to do this bit of extra work, but what we're doing is an ensure deleted and ensure created just so that we've got the brand new database. So that should all be working. Let's run it up. And immediately we're hitting another problem, and it's telling us that it cannot map date only. So although the date time is something that gets stored in a database very easily, date only, and if we hadn't hit this error, we'd immediately hit the next error on time only. Again, they haven't had the appropriate ways to connect them to a database written. So we are suffering at both ends here. We're suffering that there was no built-in JSON serialization, and nor is there any built-in storage to the database. When we're looking earlier at some other new .NET 6 features, we're looking at the new link features, we also saw that those weren't supplied by providers to the database. We could only use it to link to objects. Here we've got a similar problem, though again, at least in this case, there is a way around it, because what we can do here is, just as I've done those JSON converters, you can see I've also got these entity framework converters. So that one is actually, we create this class and derive it from a value converter, which specifies the type that we've got in our entities, so date only, the new data type, and then the type that we're going to have to convert it to then store it in the database, which is the existing one, the date time. And then you can see here in the constructor, we call the base class constructor and pass in as two parameters the conversions each way. So conceptually, very similar to the JSON serialization, we've got to tell it how to convert each way, but it's slightly different structurally. But what we're doing is we are converting it to a date time with a time only min value. So that's the way to set it to midnight on the particular date, which we said is the fix we have to have. And then also we've got the conversion the other way, where we just do a from date time, convert it back to a date. And then we can see with the time only if converter, we're converting it from a time only to a time span, which again we mentioned as a way we can kind of hack this, but it's the way that the database understands, and similar conversions there. So we write those two converters, but again we've got to hook them up, and the way that's done is actually, well, we can do this in quite a nice way that is new with .NET 6 in Entity Framework, because previously what we'd have had to do was specify a mapping for each of the properties we're interested in. So we'd had to specify that date used that converter for date, that time used the converter for time. But what we can now do is we can convert based not on the specific property, but on the type of the property. So I can, in a more general sense, say how date only should be dealt with and how time only should be dealt with, and that would then work however many properties of those types we had. So what we do is go into our DB context, and then what I'm going to do here is I'll do an override, and what I'm going to override is a thing called configure conventions. So that's this general one that does it based on type, and then what we have to do here is we've got this configuration builder coming in. So I'm going to say configuration builder dot properties. Then I'm going to specify the type. So in this case, date only. Then I'm going to say have conversion. And I'm going to specify that it uses that date only EF converter, which is the one I just showed you. So that's the separate class that does the conversion. And then I'm also going to specify that in the database, the actual column type, so I do a have column type, and that is going to be of type date. So the odd thing here is the SQL Server database already does have a type date specifically related to dates, and actually one called time specifically related to time. It's just that C# and .NET were limited in not having anything other than the combined date time. So if we pop that one in, and then let's take the whole of that and copy it, because I also want to do this thing for time only. So put time only in there, change the converter to the other one that we'd already written, the time only converter, and then specify that as being of type time for the column type. And so now if I run that up, because we've got those converters, we've now registered them on the DB context, we can see we get up there okay. If we just take a quick look in here using the SQL Server Object Explorer, and let's look in our local DB, there's databases, and there's date time demo, that's the one that just got created. And if we look in there, we can see we've got, for the tables, we've got our dbo.items, and if we look at the design of that, then we can see that our date time has just been set up as a date time 2, that's the default, but our date is a date, and our time is a time 7. So you can see that that's worked, it's got the appropriate types in there. Let's now actually make that do something. So if we go to the Swagger, and again, let's do that get to start with, so that we can just get a basic object to start working with. So there was our returned date time, but then let's copy that, and then go to our post, and into the post we'll paste our new version in there, click on execute. That now seems to work okay. You can see it's given us the correct response there. And now if we do our other get, so remember we've put in a get all now that just returns all of the items. So if we look at that one, we should be able to see that we get back all of them, which is just the one that I created, given it its ID, and so that's all there. So there we can see we've got it. The actual data types, date only and time only, pretty simple. And although they work, if we want to use them in certain practical situations, and certainly for me, putting in the database, sending them as JSON are the most important things I want to do with data types, they are somewhat limited. It is said from looking around that those features that I showed you there that I had to write for myself, or actually I had to copy them off the web, but those will be available within the later versions that we have of .NET, but for now they're not available. And personally I find that a bit irritating. You can see both sides of the argument. If everything had to be there before anything was there, then it would delay the releases. Whereas here, at least we're getting a start and we can move on to new features later on. Don't know what your thoughts are on that, whether you think it's better to get things out as soon as they're ready and then further features later. Whatever you think, maybe put it in the comments. It's something that's worth discussing. But I hope that was helpful. Nice new features, though they will get better with later releases. But if you like that, click like, do subscribe. I'll see you next time.